Chapter 52, November 5th, 2173, 1508. Ilium Tesserae System, Nos Astra. I lifted the teacup and took a sip, enjoying the floral note of the tea. Slowly placing the cup back on its saucer, I looked toward my hostess and asked, "Now that we finished with the obligatory small talk, why don't we start with the reason why you invited me?" Ayala Nasara sent me a smile that conveyed her nervousness, and fidgeted in her seat, not knowing how to start. "Well," she began, and while her stutter wasn't as prominent as at other times, she still spoke slowly and deliberately to not let it pop up. "There are two reasons why I asked you to come." She took a sip of her tea to fortify herself. "On the one hand, it's about the property you asked me to purchase for you on Thessia. Let me guess, it is not going to happen," I finished for her with a sigh. "Correct," Ayala answered with an apologetic smile. "It started out well, but some matriarch got interested in the property as well, and if a person like that gets interested, there isn't much I can do. I'm not even halfway into my matron phase, and my influence on Thessia is almost non-existent, at least in comparison to those living on the planet. There aren't many people in the galaxy who can compete with an Asari matriarch in the influence department, at least among those that aren't matriarchs themselves." "Too true," agreed Ayala. "I still remember when I was a young maiden and took my first steps into the realtor business. I had to compete with dozens who had been in the business for decades or centuries. To get even a foot in the door is still one of my proudest accomplishments." A small, secretive smile played over Ayala's lips, a smile that held a hint of an emotion I couldn't place, but sent a short shiver of unease down my spine. I soon shoved that thought away, thinking that I had imagined it, as she sent me a radiant smile and asked, "If you want, I could still try to find something on Thessia for your use. I can't promise that its location will be as good as the previous one, but it will still help you get an in on Thessia. And that's what you're angling for, right?" "No, there's no need for that," I answered after thinking the question over. "While it would give me an opportunity to expand into the heart of Asari territory, I felt that I was stretched too thin. After the current crisis on Ilium was over and done with, I wanted to concentrate on the Citadel and the Alliance again. Thessia would probably require as much focus or even more than Ilium had. Furthermore, the core worlds of the Asari territory brimmed with Eclipse presence, and after I finished cutting them to CIOs, I wanted to take a break from them. And throwing myself into another fight with them was the last thing I wanted to do right now." "If that's your wish," responded Ayala, nodding her assent, "but I will keep an eye on the situation and inform you if I hear about a good opportunity by chance. That would be wonderful." I took another sip of tea, emptying the cup. "But you said there were two reasons. If one of them was the broken deal, what is the other?" The moment I mentioned her second reason, I knew something was up. Ayala's body language clammed up tight, and her eyes flitted from one side to the other without focusing on anything. If nervousness became visible from one moment to the other, I had no doubt it would come from her like a thick cloud of haze. "I have been contacted by Quintinius," she said quietly. "Cesario, what did he want?" I asked, understanding why she had become nervous. Mentioning me around Cesario was probably a good method to make him angry. At least, that was my conjecture, as he wasn't very calm when the circle met the last time. Perhaps she thought I would react the same way. "He was worried that I would get targeted by Eclipse since I'm associating with you." I wasn't very worried about it, but he made some good points and insisted I take some of his people as guards. "Is that the reason why my guards are playing who can outstare the other with yours?" Despite the seriousness I felt in the air, Ayala managed an amused giggle. "I would guess so. The offer was too good to not accept, and it is better to be safe than sorry." "A sentiment I can understand very well," I nodded my agreement. "While I would have liked you to come to me if you had any security concerns, I can't take offense, as you have known Cesario far longer than me." I smiled reassuringly at her to show that I didn't mind. Yet in the back of my head, I was already making plans to alter my flight route and inform the personnel watching the airspace around the HQ to keep an eye out for suspicious activity. Come to think of it, the assassination attempt that started this whole fiasco happened after I visited Ayala the last time. Perhaps that was something to look into, but I hadn't been very subtle with my movements back then. I only ask that you keep them from fighting with my own guards. Something like that would only exacerbate the problems between Cesario and I continued, focusing back on the conversation. That should be possible, Ayala agreed with a shy smile. I don't want the circle to fall to pieces. It is bad enough that we have lost Nisko. He was, after all, the most sensible and reasonable among us. I wouldn't go as far as to call him that, but he was indeed the one responsible for getting us back on track whenever we lost ourselves in pointless bickering. Yes, he was very good at that, she agreed before she took a breath and said, There's one more thing I have to mention. And that would be? Ayala was about to open her mouth and answer, but it seemed like she thought differently. Shook her head and said, No, sorry, it isn't that important right now, and I don't have any evidence. She said the last part more quietly, but I heard it nonetheless. Yet, I somehow had the feeling that I wouldn't get an answer if I pressed her on it, so I pretended that I didn't hear her murmurs. If you say so, I replied slowly before drinking the last bit of tea in my cup and getting up. If there's nothing more, I still have some work that needs to be done. Thank you for the lovely tea, and I will return the favor in the future. That's not necessary, responded Ayala, shaking her head. It was my pleasure. And it will be my pleasure when I return the favor, I said, bowing my head slightly in her direction as a farewell. As I turned around to leave the room and return to my shuttle, I caught sight of the small, secretive smile that played over Ayala's face from the corner of my eyes. November 5th, 2173, 1921, Ilium Tessal System, Nosastra. The bait is placed, Madame Arbiter, said Quintinius Cesario while bowing slightly to the projected picture of his lady. Good, answered the Arbiter, her voice not altered as she would usually do to hide her identity, as the person in front of her was her loyal adjutant who wouldn't compromise her identity toward any third party. Besides, for her plans to work, there had to be a measure of trust between them so that Cesario wouldn't make the wrong moves. It won't take long until Oscar Denebrin will find the track we left for him. He will follow the clues and put them together to the incorrect conclusion we want him to arrive at. When that happens, it will be easy to take him out of the picture. How long do you think it will take, milady? The people you wanted me to contact are already waiting anxiously to pick apart his company when he falls, asked Cesario, a certain amount of disgust finding its way into his voice as he thought about some of the people the Arbiter had him contact. Be careful that your disgust doesn't shine through when you're talking with them. It will only lead to unnecessary problems, the Arbiter scolded Cesario, yet she had a small smile on her face. I'm sorry, and I will take care. It's just that I don't understand why we need to deal with such people in the first place. They are like carrion eaters, unwilling or afraid to go against strong prey, yet salivating at the chance of a big meal. It disgusts me. It's the way of the galaxy. There are multiple parties on my end, too, that wish to see Oscar Denebrin and everything he built and stands for fall. Yet they are unwilling to take the necessary steps toward that goal by themselves, afraid that they will fail and pay the price. Alas, I had already decided to go through with it long before they came into the picture. Yet the rewards they promise when we are successful are a nice bonus, wouldn't you say? That's true, agreed Cesario. The number of favors you will be getting is enough to place you into a position many in the galaxy will envy you for. Us, my dear Quintinius, us, corrected the Arbiter, and watched as Cesario visibly brightened at her words. Of course, milady, he replied. It still surprises me how many people want to see him fall, and many of them are not involved in the business side of things. The human allies, and I'm using this word lightly, do not surprise me. Denebrin, as much I loathe to, but is extremely successful inside the Alliance. And that has created a lot of resentment and jealousy among those not measuring up to him. Yet it isn't just humans that want to see him fall, right? Yes, you are correct. It isn't just humans, but members of every species in the galaxy, and not just those with the simple desire to partake in the fruits of his labor. Nonetheless, their reason is the same as everyone else's, yet seen from another perspective. He's too successful, and that, in turn, makes the Alliance successful. Too successful for some people. The Alliance's rise to prominence in the galaxy is just too fast for the taste of some, the Arbiter explained. Thinking about it, the Arbiter could only shake her head. Many of those with these feelings are among my fellow Asari. Due to our long lives, we are more suited to a gradual change. After all, we have the luxury of time and can afford to wait until our efforts bear fruit. The Turians do everything in small steps, one after the other, and while the Solarians can rush things since the founding of the Council, they came around to the Asari's way of thinking. In comparison, humanity seems to run toward the future without consideration of anyone around them, never looking back, only forward. And that is something that scares my fellow Asari. But not you? Asked Cesario. No, it does not, answered the Arbiter with a glint in her eyes. I saw my species slow crawl to the future when I was still a young maiden and decided then and there that I never wanted to be part of it. Instead of waiting for opportunities, I created them. What any other Asari would have taken a century, I accomplished in a decade. And that's why I became as influential as I am on Thessia when it isn't even the planet I was born on. I would have expected nothing less from you, milady. Your flatter is unneeded, but welcome nonetheless, my dear Quintinius, answered the Arbiter, and sent him a soft smile that caused a pleasant shiver to go over his back. Yet there is a question in my mind that I can't find the correct answer for. Would you be able to? That, of course, depends on the question, replied the Arbiter coy. Oscar Denebrin's demise will throw the Alliance into chaos, that much I know, yet why do we need to inform parties within their space about what is happening? And what do your other acquaintances hope for? Let me answer the last one first. The answer lies in the chaos. A society plagued by chaos and infighting can't focus on the powers outside and is easily influenced by them. In an effort to rise to the top, some parties will seek the help of those outside the conflict, unknowingly becoming nothing more than puppets to influence the struggling society from within and shape it into any picture they imagine. And the first part, to keep the remains of Denebrin's legacy from congregating into the hands of the few. I had you contact as many not-so-powerful players in the Alliance as possible these last few weeks so that they could prepare to take over as much as they could when the time comes. Undoubtedly, there will be others that will secure parts of Denebrin's companies, ones with enough influence and power to react immediately, but they will have to contend with those in the know and thus unable to divide everything between them, which keeps them from becoming powerful enough to soothe the chaos we want to unleash. Cesario closed his eyes, mulling over what the Arbiter said before nodding to himself and said, I think I understand now. While they are busy with infighting and squabbling over who inherits the empire Denebrin is going to leave behind, the other powers of the galaxy will use this time to establish their hold on humanity. And to keep their government from interfering too early or too effectively, you had me contact this group, correct? Yes, you are, the Arbiter confirmed with a slightly cruel smile in place at the thought of her plans becoming reality. How did it go anyway? I'm curious. The representative was curt but polite. They transferred a considerable amount of credits to me as thanks for the warning. It was also mentioned that they would pay double the amount again if we warn them a week before it happens. I think, the Arbiter began slowly, that we won't do that. They should be grateful that we warned them in the first place. It would give them an unfair advantage over the other competitors, and that would work against our goals. As you say, milady, answered Cesario, bowing to show his compliance with her wishes. November 7th, 2073, 0811, Ilium to Sail System, Nosestra, Spaceport. He slowly rotated his shoulders to work out the tension in them as he walked away from the security checkpoint of the spaceport. Thankfully, it hadn't taken longer than a few minutes, and the authorities hadn't noticed anything wrong. Not that he had expected them to notice anything in the first place. His training and the technology of the AIS to deceive customs were both more than enough to pull the wool over their eyes. Otherwise, he would have been asked some very uncomfortable questions. Questions that he would never answer. But that was beside the point. The tongue lashing he would get from his handler was more than enough for the Lawrence to do his best. Especially since they got this mission assigned by the big boss himself, Terra had been far more pedantic concerning, well, everything since then, and Lawrence would do his best to not earn her ire during this mission if he could help it. After all, she saw it as her and by association, his big chance to rise within the AIS. It didn't matter as much for him to rise toward a higher position within the AIS as for Tara. But in the last 6 months, she had been his handler, operator, and support. She had become a good friend, and he wanted to help her realize her ambitions. Besides, it wasn't like he would get another position anyway, or wanted one in the first place. Becoming one of the first field agents of the Artemis project was more than enough for him, and not a position he wanted to give up for the foreseeable future. Being on the field and doing work that supported and protected humanity with his own 2 hands was what he wanted to do, like his father before him. Lawrence walked through the busy halls of the spaceport, ignoring the commotion of the arriving and leaving travelers rushing to and from the different space lines, connecting the most important worlds of the known galaxy with each other for those without their own starships. Those starships were usually filled to the brim, and the companies flying the routes had to send at least a ship a day to keep up with the sheer demand. Thankfully, due to the number of travelers, it was pretty easy to disappear in the mass as just another simple traveler, something a private flight would never allow. Furthermore, it was easier to slip something through customs due to the fact that the personnel had to check so many people without making them wait too long, which affected their efficiency, an advantage that a private ship or material transporter wouldn't have. The method still wasn't perfect as to get through the immigration process. One's identity, even if it was a fake one, and a picture of one's person would be entered into the system. That way, there would be traces of one's person being left behind after the job. And while there were ways around that, Lawrence didn't see the need for an overcomplicated entry for what he was here for. His mission didn't require absolute secrecy or not leaving behind anything that could be traced back to the AIS. And so a simple fake identity with a concrete reason to be on Ilium was more than enough. His current identity was that of a person working for an art collector who had taken an interest in the statue of an Asari artist who died around 200 years ago. The artist wasn't someone particularly famous, but known enough for her artworks to sell after her death. Lawrence would meet the Solarian art dealer, buy the statue, and arrange for its transport back into Alliance territory. Sadly, the transportation would delay itself for another week or so because the transport company would have some unspecified problems on their end, but because they had already signed a contract, which he could only back out of if the transport delayed itself for 20 days, he would have to wait on Ilium. At least his employer got a discount and he could play tourist for a few days. He could barely stop his left eye from twitching when he thought back on how Tara had made him repeat the cover story over and over again, adding some details whenever she thought of something. At one point, Lawrence had to put his foot down, as too many details would make the cover story and identity hard to remember, especially if he had to do the same with the other 2 fake identities he had memorized for use. Generally, every AIS field agent memorized at least 3 fake identities. Of course, those identities were nothing more than the bare bones to act as the person they were impersonating and wouldn't hold up to a deeper investigation. But for the short time they were used, they would be enough. On the other hand, some AIS agents had far more elaborate characters to choose from with digital and physical documentation depicting their lives. But those were only used if the agent had to go deeper or longer undercover than for the short-time mission people like Lawrence got. For example, every AIS agent who infiltrated Cerberus on a deep level had such an identity. As Lawrence left the spaceport building to find a cab to fly him to his booked hotel, he saw a man walking through the crowd who had taken the same spaceship to come here as him. Normally, he wouldn't have taken notice of him, as the man was completely unassuming, if well-dressed in his 3-piece suit with a wine-red dress shirt. But during the flight, Lawrence had noticed that the man's eyes were always on the move from one person to another, as if he was analyzing them and deciding if they were dangerous. Furthermore, while the man's posture was seemingly relaxed, there was a certain tension that would allow him to spring into action the moment it was needed. Lawrence would quit his job immediately if that man didn't work in intelligence too. Yet, he didn't know which organization the man worked for, and as long as he didn't interfere, Lawrence wouldn't do anything more than inform Tara so that she could send a memo to the higher-ups. After all, the man could also work for the AIS and was here for a completely unrelated mission. Something like that wasn't unusual, and Lawrence and Tara had no need to know about any other ongoing mission within their operation zone. Finding an empty cab wasn't hard, and the moment Lawrence sat down on his seat, the driver fired up the engine to bring him to the address Lawrence told him. With a wave of his hand, he closed the semi-transparent window between him and the driver before activating his Omni tool and calling Tara. "Hey, I just wanted to let you know I arrived just fine, no problems or anything like that." "Good to hear. Seems like I worried for nothing. But you know me, I don't like these public transports." The extranet reviews range from "it's good" to "barely survived a pirate attack and was stranded in space for days," came the melodious voice of Tara from his earpiece. He could even detect an undercurrent of worry mixed with relief in her voice, something Lawrence knew to be fake. "You worry too much sometimes," he replied, keeping up the guise of this just being a normal conversation between two good friends, or perhaps lovers from the same workplace. "The Helium route is always protected, with all the traffic between here and the Citadel, not to mention all the trade that goes along the route. There are probably only a few routes with better protection." I know, Tara replied, letting out a sigh as if she was tired of their argument. "Anyway, I got contacted by the art dealer while you were in transit. He said he got another few pieces that our employer may like, and that you are free to look at them. I didn't make any decision on your behalf, as you know what he liked the best. I'll take a look at them. Perhaps there's something among them that he would like. I've accompanied him often enough to know what he would choose if he were here." A smile hushed over Lawrence's face. Apparently, the AIS crew that had transported his mission gear to Ilium had included a few more items that could make his job much easier, depending on if he needed them in the first place. "That reminds me, I think I saw someone that looked like John at the airport. It's crazy how you can be so far away from the Alliance and still run into someone who reminds you of one of your friends." There was a moment of pause on the other side of the channel before Tara responded. "John, huh? Haven't talked to him for a while. I'll ask him if he wants to have dinner with us when you come back." Tara paused for another second. "I've got to go back to work. It was good to hear your voice. Stay safe out there." "I will. See you in a week or so if nothing comes in between," said Lawrence and closed the connection. He relaxed against the seat, letting his head fall into his neck, closing his eyes while letting the last part of their conversation go through his head. Most of their conversation had been in code so that anyone listening in on their conversation would only hear a normal chat. Saying that he met someone who reminded him of a friend was a code for the fact that he saw someone he guessed had similar training to that of an AIS field agent, while the name John came from the old placeholder named John Doe, to tell Tara that Lawrence couldn't identify the group the man belonged to. In the same vein, Tara had told him that she didn't know of any other operations in the area but would look into it. In the meantime, he should proceed with their mission as that took priority. Hopefully, it wasn't anything serious, as Lawrence was exhausted and couldn't wait to finally arrive at his hotel room and have a chance to relax and sleep. Fighting, sneaking around, and all the other stuff a field agent had to do were no problems, but traveling long distances in a packed spaceship? That was exhausting as hell. Chapter 53. November 8th, 2173, 1228, Ilium Tessal System, Nos Astra, Ad Astra HQ. He stood on the steps of the main entrance to the Ad Astra HQ building when looking up its impressive height. It was a massive building housing hundreds of workers and other employees. Even the reinforcements of security officers that still trickled in with every passing day would have a place to stay in the building's barracks, workplace, hospital, residence. It was all that for Ad Astra's employees and more. It was a veritable fortress, a bastion of humanity on a world otherwise inhabited by aliens. Was it any wonder that Gregor was in awe? Even should Ilium's alien population turn hostile against the humans living here, this fortress could give them shelter and defend them until help arrived. Even if this help had to travel through the whole galaxy, if he didn't have his current position, Gregor would have sent in his application to work for Ad Astra years ago, yet if the chance to change his employer came across, he would stay with his current one without hesitation. He knew what he was doing was for the benefit of humanity, to help his species rise to the top of the galactic hierarchy And today he would do his part so humanity could rise to greater heights without problems. All he had to do was to step forward and speak a few words, and he would help keep history on the right course. When Gregor started moving, every single one of his steps was sure and steady. Furthermore, his heartbeat, which had risen as he thought about what he was about to do, calmed down to his usual pulse rate. Even his mind felt more tranquil than before as he took the last steps and stopped right before the main entrance made out of glass. Still, he had something to do before he could go in. His hand went into the pocket of his trousers and took out the small pin badge, which he attached to his suit jacket's lapel. It was a small pin painted with 3 colors, black, white, and yellow. Everyone who knew of his organization would recognize the symbol, and it should give Gregor enough legitimation to secure a meeting with Oscar Denebrin. Or at least it should get their notice and call security on his case, where he could explain his appearance. After all, there had to be a reason why a member of his organization would approach a well-known public figure in the open. The moment he stepped inside the building, Gregor felt eyes scanning him, deciding if he was an apparent threat or not. At first, it seemed like they were dismissing him, but after he managed half of the way to the reception desk, the feeling returned, much more intense than before. As he reached the receptionist and was about to ask if it would be possible to meet with Mr. Denebrin, another person stepped forward from the side and said, "Hitomi, take a short break. I'll cover for you." Hitomi, the receptionist, looked confused to the side, but after seeing the smiling expression of her substitute, she gave a single resolute nod and answered, "I'll be back in a minute or so. Take care, Miss Ludendorff." Without looking back a single time, Hitomi left Gregor and the newly arrived Miss Ludendorff alone. Her steps seemed unhurried, but they still had a sense of urgency behind them. This and the fact that the substitute arrived the moment he was about to arrive at the reception desk told him that the personnel overlooking the lobby had identified his affiliation and commenced with a standard protocol concerning potentially dangerous people. "Now," Ms. Ludendorff began, "may I have your name, and could you state your purpose for coming here today?" The smile she gave him was practiced well, and if Gregor hadn't as much experience with such things as he had, he wouldn't have seen that it was fake. After all, he saw a similar smile in the mirror when he practiced his own. "Gregor McConty, I would like to speak to Mr. Denebrin. I have some information my employer would like to share with him as it concerns the future of his company," Gregor answered, trying to convey his sincerity with his eyes. "And may I ask the name of your employer?" "I think you know it already," he replied, and tapped his badge lightly with his finger, bringing her attention to it. Ms. Ludendorff nodded at his explanation. "Very well. Please take one of the elevators to your left. Someone will wait for you upstairs." She pointed toward Gregor's left, and he could see the 5 elevators at the side of the lobby. "Thank you, ma'am. Have a good day." And with his farewell given, Gregor turned to walk toward the elevators, almost missing the minuscule bow, and whispered, "Goodbye," from Ms. Ludendorff. When Gregor got closer to the elevators, one of the 5 doors opened without prompting, and a wry smile appeared on Gregor's face at the blatant invitation. He didn't doubt that whichever elevator he chose would still stop on the same level, yet picking a different one just to be petty wouldn't help in the slightest. Right now, he was here to meet with one of the most powerful humans alive, and acting immature wouldn't help him to get the meeting. Thus, he walked into the open elevator cabin and stood in the middle of the small space. He put the hands in front of his lap with his fingers entangled, a simple gesture of goodwill and the signal that he wasn't here to cause any trouble. His entangled fingers would make it hard to grab any weapon quickly or attack one of the security officers Ad Astra was sure to send his way. If he was lucky, they would let him meet Oscar Denebrin without clapping him in irons to ensure he posed no threat to their boss. After all, Gregor didn't want to meet one of his heroes looking like a prisoner. That would be awkward. The elevator's door closed with a hiss, which sounded ominous to his ears somehow, and the cabin started moving upward. It was a smooth ride, and if there wasn't a window showing that the elevator was indeed moving, Gregor would have believed it was standing still, especially as the display didn't show any floor number. It was probably a precaution to keep him from orienting himself within the building. Yet, in Gregor's opinion, it was useless as he could estimate the floor by looking out of the window and comparing the altitude with nearby buildings. Of course, it wasn't absolutely precise, but he could make an educated guess where in the building he was, and that would have been enough for Gregor if he had been inclined to do more than talk today. A soft ding announced the elevator's arrival at its target floor, and Gregor waited a moment after its doors opened to step out. His fingers still entangled in front of his lap, he slowly turned his head around to survey the welcoming committee. After a quick head count, he could see at least a dozen Ad Astra security officers with their weapons on display, but thankfully not trained at him. The man standing in front of one of the two groups that blocked Gregor's potential escape routes down the two sides of the corridor wore a slightly altered uniform, identifying him as the captain of the unit. "Are you here to escort me to Mr. Denebren?" asked Gregor, already knowing the answer but trying to be polite. "No," came the gruff answer of the captain. "We're here to bring you to the interrogation room. There are some questions that have to be asked, starting with your reason for coming here." "Then lead the way," replied Gregor, his tone still impeccably polite, as he had expected something like this to happen before he could meet with Oscar Denebren. Since the beginning of Ad Astra's mini-war with Eclipse, the security around Denebren had been beefed up like a bodybuilder on steroids. It would have been a wonder if a member of an organization that had the reputation of a terrorist group would have been able to meet with the boss of Ad Astra without any prior security checks. Anything else would have been plain stupid. The captain signaled him to follow and turned around. The 6 security officers on his side of the corridor did the same and started walking. Having no other choice, Gregor started to follow them, keeping close to them while the remaining security officers took up the rear. While they were walking, Gregor took the opportunity to take a closer look at the captain, who was walking a few steps in front of him. The first thing he noticed was that the captain wasn't wearing any visible weapon, probably as a precaution, as he was the closest to Gregor. Yet, that didn't mean that the captain would be defenseless. People in his position were trained in hand-to-hand combat, and the hundreds of different functions an Omni tool could be equipped with meant that, in present times, nobody was truly unarmed. The walk didn't take long until they arrived at a scanner. It created a blue field spanning the whole width of the corridor, similar to a gateway. One look was enough for Gregor to determine that it was supposed to check for hidden weapons. The sound it made whenever one of the Ad Astra security officers went through was more than enough to confirm his hypothesis. The captain of the unit went before Gregor and made it through without a problem. If that was because he didn't have any weapons or an identifier that recognized him as a member of Ad Astra, he didn't know. Afterward, the captain turned around and beckoned Gregor to go through too, with a smile that held some hidden smugness and an expression that said, "I told you about Guinepo." Gregor went through the scanning field, and the tone it made was only slightly different from the others. The captain gave a single nod and held out a bracelet for Gregor. "It's an Omni tool neutralizer. As we can't know if you're using an implanted chip for yours, we would like you to wear this. Your cooperation will be noted." Without hesitating, Gregor took the bracelet and clasped it on his left arm. A minor shock went through his arm, and he shook it to get rid of this feeling. "May I try to activate my Omni tool?" he asked, curious if this bracelet did as advertised. "You may," came the curt response. With a flick of his wrist, Gregor tried to activate his Omni tool, as he had done thousands of times before. But this time, he failed to draw even the slightest reaction out of it. "It's secured to my Omni tool. When you leave, I will disengage the bracelet, and all functions will be restored," the captain explained, and Gregor nodded in understanding. He gave the bracelet one last look, questioning how many devices were currently trying to sift through the data on his Omni tool. There was no doubt that the device on his arm did more than suppress his Omni tool. After all, it would be what he would have done if he had been the person to construct this. Yet there wasn't anything to worry about. Before coming to Ilium, Gregor had exchanged his personal Omni tool for a new one, as it would take too much time to delete and later on reacquire the information saved on it. Furthermore, deleting data would leave traces that a sophisticated program could use to restore them. And while his purpose in coming here was to help Ad Astra and Oscar Denebren on Cerberus's behalf, giving them information about Cerberus's operations unconnected to this case wasn't needed. As such, the only information they would be able to find would be what he left them to find if the bracelet did what Gregor expected it to do. Hopefully, the information would be his ticket to a meeting with Oscar Denebren. They walked silently for 1 or 2 minutes before the captain lifted his hand up and everyone stopped. Gregor stood a few steps behind him, leaving enough distance between them so that none of the security officers got the idea that he would be able to attack the captain without being stopped in time. Yet he was close enough to see the orange glowing circle appear over the captain's ear as he held his finger to it. A few seconds later, the glowing circle disappeared and the captain turned to face Gregor. His face was mostly neutral, but Gregor could see traces of annoyance, disbelief, and caution. "I don't know why, but the people up top are willing to hear you out. I'm ordered to take you there." "Then please lead the way," answered Gregor, and he couldn't suppress the hint of smugness that crept into his tone. The captain noticed it and took a step closer. An intense, thunderous look appeared in his eyes as he said, "I don't care why you are here or which information you have that got those higher than me interested in you. But let me tell you one thing, should you do anything wrong, I will shoot you without hesitation." A threatening gesture, an insult, or even just breathing the wrong way in Mr. Denebrin's direction. I will not enjoy it, but I also won't regret it. I won't even think twice about it. You mean nothing to me, and I will treat you that way. Do you understand? Normally, Gregor would have scoffed at such a blatant try of intimidation. Yet there was something in the captain's eyes and voice telling him the captain wasn't making any threats. Combrowns, he was making a promise. Gregor could only swallow the sudden, fleeting feeling of fear and give a silent nod in response. Seeing that his words had the desired effect, the captain turned around and led the way toward an elevator. He swiped his Omni tool over a reader and selected 4 officers from their group to position themselves in the newly arrived cabin. Jerking his head toward the open door, he signaled Gregor to enter and followed shortly after. The ride was a silent one. Nobody was saying anything, and if Gregor hadn't heard the nigh unnoticeable sounds of breathing, he could have sworn that he was alone in the cabin. Thankfully, it was a short ride, and Gregor was glad to step out of the cabin in its oppressive atmosphere. They stepped into an empty corridor, and from a look out of a window, Gregor concluded that they had to be on a floor near the top of the building. The walls were clad in wood, giving the corridor a comforting yet elegant feeling, and the floor consisted of a kind of stone that was polished to shine. Gregor could even see a murky reflection of himself on it. As they walked toward their destination, they came across various plants in pots, tastefully placed between doors leading to offices belonging to the executive of Ad Astra. The plants ranged from those found on Ilium to those from Earth, and from the look of it, they were expertly taken care of. During their walk, Gregor didn't see any other person walking through the corridors, not even through those branching off. If he had to take a guess, then he would say that everyone working on this level got a message to stay in their offices until they passed through or until Gregor left the floor. Their group stopped in front of a massive wooden double door. Taking a closer look, Gregor could see the signs that anybody trying to force this door open would have a hard time with it. The door itself was reinforced, and the wood was obviously only a front hiding its steel core. Perhaps they used even something stronger. Even Cerberus didn't know what Ad Astra was hiding in their labs and hadn't released to the public and Alliance yet. After a second look, while they waited for the doors to open, he also noticed the small, barely noticeable emitters placed around the doorframe. A simple press of a button would activate them and create a kinetic barrier in front of the door that even heavy weapons would have problems getting through. Gregor couldn't stop the small smile from forming on his face. Standing in front of this door alone told him he was about to meet one of the most powerful and influential humans in the galaxy, if not the most. Sometimes it was astounding how standing in front of a door could impact one's nerves and expectations. When the doors opened, he couldn't help the slight pang of disappointment as he wasn't led into Oscar Denebrin's office, but into a receiving room larger than most apartments he had seen in his youth. The decor was simple yet elegant, just like the corridors they passed. The right side of the room was dominated by a sitting area where those having an appointment could wait for Mr. Denebrin to call them into his office, while the left only had a single desk where his secretary worked. Gregor's eyes scanned the room for any hidden defense mechanisms, and while his experience helped him identify some hints, anybody else would have overlooked them. Defensive barriers coming out from the ground, kinetic barriers protecting the doors and windows, and hidden turrets in every corner of the room, effectively creating a dead zone for anybody stupid enough to walk into the room with ill intentions. There were probably more, but Gregor didn't have the time to look further as the captain motioned him to move. But one thing was sure, Ad Astra took the security of their boss seriously, and this was just a branch HQ. While the conflict with Eclipse had probably played its part in the security, Gregor couldn't help but think that the security in the Ad Astra offices on Earth, Terra Nova, and the Citadel would be comparable, if not even more extensive. He was led toward the double door on the other side, where two guards, who looked like they didn't come from the security division of Ad Astra, but its anti-piracy forces, stood on each side. They didn't move an inch or even twitch at their presence, staring stoically forward. The hairs that suddenly stood at attention on Gregor's neck as he closed the distance between them told him enough to be wary of them. Those two were dangerous. Maybe not capital D, dangerous, but both would be able to kill Gregor before he noticed them pointing their weapons his way. Well, it wasn't like he was here to do anything that would result in having to fight for his life. This was simply an information delivery, and knowing Oscar Denebren's reputation and conduct, Gregor would walk out of the building unharmed, even should his words be taken in the worst way. As the door to Oscar Denebren's office slid open, Gregor took one last deep breath before stepping into the room. He didn't know what he expected, but the office looked similar to the lobby and somehow fit the man sitting behind the desk at the opposite wall. The room was dominated by the wooden desk with two comfortable-looking chairs in front of it. A small sitting area with two couches and a small table to the side went mostly unnoticed. Its presence was overshadowed by the imposing presence of the other piece of furniture in the room. Yet Gregor's eyes focused on the person sitting comfortably at the desk. Apart from his first curious look around the office, it didn't occur to him to let his look focus on anything else. The presence of the man called Oscar Denebren was too captivating to him. It felt like he was frozen in place by the cool look in Denebren's eyes, that felt like he was laying open every secret Gregor held. For the second time in his entire life, Gregor encountered a situation where the phrase, like a mouse before a tiger, could be applied. The only other time had been during his briefing for this mission as he talked with the leader of his organization, the elusive man, and that had been via hologram. This time it felt far more intense. "You asked for a meeting," said a woman in an elaborate uniform, showing her position of commander, who stood a step behind Denebren's left shoulder. "Mr. Denebren is willing to hear you out, as it is not usual for Cerberus to act so openly." Only his year-long experience with intense meetings stopped Gregor from flinching. He had been so focused on the man before him that he had overlooked the woman, whom he identified as Commander Ababy, the commander of the Ad Astra security forces, standing behind him. "Of course, thank you for the opportunity," Gregor responded with a dip of his head to show respect. He put on a slight smile that every trained negotiator attained with enough time and practice to put the opposite party at ease. It wouldn't have any impact on the conversation and its course, but it felt natural to Gregor to put it on nonetheless. A member of our organization was recently approached by a Turian who wanted to open talks concerning, as he called it, a golden opportunity to further our influence within the Alliance. While our organization isn't known to work together with different species very well, we still recognize the value of doing so. In this instance, our member agreed to hear him out, and after the conversation and presentation of this so-called opportunity, she decided to inform her higher-ups about it, who, in turn, send the information up the ladder. "How high did the information go before a decision was made?" asked Commander Ababy. "Until the top," answered Gregor without missing a beat. "Until the top?" repeated the commander, questioning. "Yes, it went all the way to the top of our organization." "And what was this information that the elusive man decided to send you to me?" asked Oscar Denebren, speaking up for the first time since Gregor entered the room. His voice was deep and soft, almost soothing. Yet it also carried the confidence and power of someone used to give commands and have them obeyed instantly. "The opportunity to acquire parts of Ad Astra after it breaks up after your assassination," replied Gregor, instinctively lowering his head slightly in deference after delivering the news. Normally, Gregor would have expected to see some reaction ranging from surprise to disbelief. Instead, Denebren just looked at him intently before saying, I see. This was the reaction Gregor expected someone to have when they opened their fridge and saw that they couldn't make their favorite dish because an ingredient was missing, not when they were told that there would be an assassination attempt. Perhaps he shouldn't be so surprised. A man in Oscar Denebren's situation probably had to fight off an assassination attempt per day, with most of them not even worth mentioning to him. It could also be that he had read the information Ad Astra had possibly gotten from his Omni tool and had been prepared for Gregor's revelation. Yet somehow Gregor knew this would have been the same reaction if Denebren had been uninformed. So, continued Denebren, his expression still calm and composed, why did Cerberus decide to send you instead of sending a simple message? After the fact that we were approached, we wanted to make sure that you and Ad Astra understand that concerning this issue, we stand on the same side and not against you. As much as our approaches differ, Cerberus acknowledges that Ad Astra and you, as a person, are one of the best assets available to guarantee a strong humanity. I am flattered that your organization thinks so highly of me, commented Denebren dryly. Gregor responded with a wry smile. It may sound like brown-nosing, but that is the essence of Cerberus' stance concerning you, and a stance, I believe, is shared by most of humanity. Denebren waved his words away. Anything else you want to share? I don't believe you came here with just a warning. That is not Cerberus' style. You are correct. We identified the Turian who approached us and connected him to one Quintinius Cetaxario, who I believe is currently a close associate of yours. Not for much longer, replied Denebren. We already knew that he was working against our interests. This only proves that we should accelerate our plans. Nonetheless, I'm thankful for your information. Anything else? Furthermore, we gathered a list of names of other people they approached. If you want, I could recount some of them. That's not necessary, answered Denebren with a shake of his head. They haven't done anything I wouldn't do myself. They are vultures, but that is to be expected in this business. And if that's the case, I believe I already know their names. It's not that hard to conclude who would do something like that. Nonetheless, I would feel better if I handed over the information as proof of Cerberus' stance. And where is this information? Asked Commander Abebe, cutting into the conversation. Gregor turned his head toward her and said, I asked a messenger to deliver it to me when I exit the building. Did you think you needed an exit strategy? Asked Denebren with a raised eyebrow. Not that I didn't trust your civility. It's just a habit I acquired after dealing with less civil groups, replied Gregor, and he could feel his ears turn hot from embarrassment. Nothing to apologize for, said Denebren, and showed for the first time since the start of the conversation a small smile on his face. I approve. It shows that you take every possibility into account. It's a sign of a professional. Thank you, replied Gregor, bowing slightly once again in Denebren's direction. A small part of him felt giddy at being praised by Denebren. The captain that accompanied you here will take the information off your hands after you leave the building, said Commander Abebe, with a pointed look toward the captain standing behind Gregor, and didn't give him any chance to object. The only thing he could do was nod in acceptance. Knowing that the conversation was over, Gregor started to turn around to begin the way down, but Commander Abebe's voice stopped him. One last question. Gregor turned back around. Why did Cerberus decide on this course of action? Gregor waited a moment before answering to study the faces in front of him. The commander looked like she was waiting for an answer, traces of confusion on her face, while Denebren looked slightly surprised at his commander, as if he didn't expect her to ask the question, but quickly schooled his expression. As I already mentioned, Cerberus believes that Ad Astra and Oscar Denebren are vital for humanity's future in the galaxy. His demise and Ad Astra's breaking up would spell chaos for the Alliance. And chaos isn't something we need right now. It would only make it easier for humanity's enemies to take advantage of us. Having said his piece, Gregor turned around after giving Denebren a last slight bow and left the office with the captain who had escorted him here a step behind. He had accomplished his goals in making clear that Cerberus wasn't an enemy of Oscar Denebren. Whether anything came out of it and if their relationship would improve over time wasn't his concern, at least not right now. Chapter 54, November 8th, 2173, 1305, Ilium Tisei System Nos Astra, Ad Astra HQ. My eyes didn't waver from the Cerberus agent's back as he slowly left my office. It wasn't caution that led to me doing this. At least not caution of this man. The agent wasn't dangerous by himself, and even should he make any hostile moves, the soldiers around him would put a stop to it before I could sneeze. No, it was caution toward the organization he represented. One should never look away from anything Cerberus-related if one doesn't want to experience an unfortunate surprise later. "Do you think he said the truth?" asked Commander Abebe, a frown on her face. "About the impending assassination attempt?" "He did. Cesario, or rather the Arbiter, knows that no matter what, Eclipse will be unable to do more than be a thorn in our side. They will take matters into their own hands. After all, they want an end to this pointless conflict. Well, same as us. The only difference between us is who we want to see standing after the dust settles," I answered. The Cerberus agent had mentioned that their organization and others had been approached by Cesario's people to prepare for the fallout of my hypothetical death, a plan to split my business empire. If enough people knew about it beforehand, it would keep one person from consolidating too much into one hand, dividing the power it would afford, and thus keeping them from becoming as powerful and influential as I was now. The king dies and his lands are being fought over by ambitious lords. Perhaps not the best analogy, but one I found fitting. Their quarrel would certainly invite outsiders to try and take advantage of the situation to elevate themselves above their previous station and influence the ongoing events more to their liking. It certainly sounded like something an Asari would plan to play the reasonable and calming mediator when things get hot. I wouldn't be surprised if there is a price for the one who manages to break the cohesiveness of the alliance to allow for more Asari influence in our way of life. And I could say without any arrogance that my death would give such an opening to exploit. A thought appeared at the back of my mind, a solution that would prevent the collapse of my business empire if I ever died by something else than old age. An heir. It didn't have to be a child of mine. For that, I would have to find a wife to have children with, and to make sure they grew up into responsible and capable adults. And while today's society doesn't care one bit about one's sexual orientation or what relationship they had with each other, the picture of a man married to a woman and having children together was still romanticized. It was the way with the least obstacles and controversies that could lead to scandals I didn't need. And personally, of all the available options, this one appealed the second most to me. The most appealing would be to simply adopt a child with less fortunate circumstances and the right potential. This way, I shave off years before my heir would be ready to join my side and help me to rule the galaxy. My lips twitched upwards in amusement as I added the last bit. PR could twist a nice story out of that. Coupled with a few donations to 100 or so orphanages, I would appear like I found my fatherly side. After all, I was already at the age where most had a child that went to high school. My thoughts were interrupted when Commander Abebe shook her head and said, "That isn't what I meant. It's that Cerberus is on our side when—" "Oh, that," I replied and rolled my shoulders when I noticed how stiff they were. The Cerberus agent didn't lie about that, but he also didn't say the whole truth. In what manner? As long as we work for the betterment of humanity, Cerberus will consider us their allies. You may have noticed that the agent tried to avoid using the Alliance's name as a synonym. They don't care about governments but our species. As long as our goals align with theirs for the good of humanity, they will support us from the shadows. The only question that remains is what we consider good for humanity. Right now, they might be similar enough, but what about the Picard? What if their goals change? Will we still be allies? I don't think so. Do you think that will happen in the near future? Should I get the word out to the other commanders to get ready? Asked Abebe, worry written on her face. I could understand her concerns. Cerberus wasn't an enemy one could take lightly. They worked and fought in the shadows. And while my company could crush them, it wouldn't be without high losses on our side. Furthermore, it would take a long time until every piece of the organization was destroyed, and that would be what would have to happen. Else, they would return like the heads of a hydra. A simple wave of my hand dispelled her concerns. No, that won't be necessary. Simply keeping an eye on their moves will be enough. From what I know, something monumental will have to happen for such a shift in priorities. Yet, that can change as fast as I could change the direction of our company. The elusive man and I are in similar positions and can make decisions at the drop of a hat. The only difference between us is that some people in the Alliance government would have some things to say if I suddenly decided to stop producing starships in favor of creating toys. I added the last part to lighten the mood, and from a baby's raised eyebrow at my comment, it worked. When I saw her rolling her eyes at my grin, I knew that there would be no more doom and gloom atmosphere inside my office. At least until the next crisis wandered over my desk. Nonetheless, I continued, as if nothing happened, we will have to act in the near future. If Cesario is planning another assassination attempt, together with the Arbiter, we should accelerate our plans and give them an opportunity to act. And by doing that, we will control the when and where, finished Commander Abebe. It won't be easy to create an opening that doesn't seem like a trap to them. Otherwise, they won't take it, and we will squander our advantage. If they realize this, we will not be able to control the next attempt. Correct, I nodded. Right now, we have a rough time frame. The people they contacted in the Alliance and elsewhere will not wait forever, and if it takes too long, they won't believe it will happen at all. My guess is that they will be ready to act upon their plans in 3 months at the latest. This means for us that we should target the end of the year for our counter, right? It would be for the best, I agreed and closed my eyes to concentrate on the different things that had to be done beforehand. We should take care of the eclipse situation before we spring our trap, too. Otherwise, they could throw a wrench in our plans. And I would like the situation to be done with. Every day we continue this fight, more of our people land in the infirmary, and I'm sick of writing condolence letters to the families of those whose lives end before they even get there. When I opened my eyes and looked at Abebe, I could see how done she was with the situation. There was anger and exhaustion equally in every new wrinkle she got since the fighting began. The situation will be resolved very soon, I assured her. Furthermore, when the pain in the neck we have to deal with here on Ilium is gone, I expect that Jonah Sedaris herself will want to speak with me. Why would that psycho want to speak with you? Asked Abebe, puzzled. The only thing I expect from her would be cries of vengeance for going against her. Oh, that she will do too, I answered lightly. But I don't think that she will be able to act upon any threats against me in the near future. From the latest reports, it seems like Eclipse's presence within the Alliance territory is non-existent, and even in the closest territories, it is dwindling by the day. She will have enough trouble consolidating her remaining assets and be very cautious about provoking another retaliation from Ad Astra. Sedaris will not be able to do anything but try to make peace if she wants to keep control over Eclipse. They may fear her, but with what we're doing, it won't take long before her men fear us more. And that is something she knows. Does she? Questioned Abebe, and I could understand her hesitation. Jonah Sedaris was not, by any application of the word, a stable person. It was the reason why she got her power and how she held it for so long. I count on it, I answered, sounding more confident in my answer than I truly was. There was a smidgen of doubt in my mind that events would play out as I envisioned them, but I had to project a picture of confidence nonetheless. Anything else would just get everybody worried about the future. And if she doesn't, I continued, it will only mean that more of Eclipse will be brought down. While we won't be able to completely eradicate them, we can make it nearly impossible to run missions outside Asari-controlled space. It wouldn't take long after that until a new leader will be more than willing to negotiate peace with us. If you're sure about that, I will trust your judgment, said Commander Abebe, with a tilt of her head toward me. Even if her words said otherwise, I could still see some skepsis in her face. It was minute, but I had enough experience to know where to look for it. I didn't take offense at it. Perhaps it was optimistic of me, but sometimes one had to be. I'll send out some notices that our deadline is the end of the year. It should be enough time to get everything done. November 8th, 2173, 1939. Ilium Tessalus System, Nos Astra. Lawrence threw his jacket on the bed and let out a long sigh. It had taken far longer than he thought to get a meeting with the art dealer, and the meeting itself had been exhausting. 5 hours of his time wasted, in his opinion, and he would never get them back. Dozens upon dozens of artworks from artists he never heard about, but the dealer talked about them like Lawrence should know them and be in awe of their reputations. At least if he considered the prices the dealer wanted for their works. And like every good agent who wanted to keep his cover, he said the right words at the right moment and feigned respect the whole time. Tara would have been proud if she had seen him. Keeping his cover might be important, and it had been successful, but it was still exhausting. Thankfully, checking on the transport container had been much faster and much more rewarding. His eyes wandered over to the black bag he left at the door. When he arrived at the container and opened it, this bag had been the only item inside of it. The courier division of the AIS had placed it there. It was one of the divisions Lawrence had the most respect for. They managed to get every kind of item through any security, be it customs or the private security of any company. Even the security of the Citadel and their vaunted CSEC were nothing to them. Rumors had it that the only company secure enough to detect them bringing items in was Ad Astra, and that was only because the AIS used the HQ on Terra Nova for training. He didn't know how much truth was behind the rumors, but considering that most of the equipment for Project Artemis came out of Ad Astra's labs, he would guess they were true. Furthermore, the friendship between Oscar Denebrin and his boss, Andrew Clark, was no secret. Shaking his head to clear his head, Lawrence went over to the small cabinet of drinks his hotel room had and poured himself a glass of a sorry spirit that looked a bit like the Scottish whiskey he liked. After taking a small sip of it, he walked over to the window to look over the cityscape. Switching the glass to his left hand, he used his right to fire up his Omni tool, and within a few seconds, Lawrence called Tara through a secure line. It took a few minutes until the call was rerouted over a dozen servers so that it wouldn't be traced back to him, and when he was finally connected to Tara, a small smile appeared on his face. "Don't worry, the line is secure, and there's nothing pressing," Lawrence began in place of a greeting. He knew that she wanted to know these things first, so why wait for her to ask for it? "All right," she answered. "Did everything go well today? You had the meeting with that art dealer, right?" "It went well," replied Lawrence. "It just took a lot longer than I expected. I paid for the art piece we chose for the cover story, but the dealer was insistent on showing me 100 more pieces. At least, it felt like 100, and they were all much more expensive too." "You shouldn't sound so surprised. The dealer thinks you are working for an art aficionado with more money than he knows what to do with. So it's only reasonable that he wants to showcase some of his more expensive pieces in the hope that you will take a liking to one of them and convince your client to buy one of them." "Yeah, I know. It's just that it is exhausting," whined Lawrence and took another sip of his spirit. "Stop whining. It's just a bit of small talk. If I know you, and I do, you didn't listen to his sale pitch at all and thought the whole time about how you could either kill the dealer and make it look like an accident or use one of the artworks to do it." "Hey, I did not," protested Lawrence. "I stopped thinking about it after the 50-second idea when I started to repeat myself. I just shut out everything and nodded in intervals to make it look like I was still listening. He seemed pretty happy at the end, even if I didn't commit to anything. I just said that I would mention it to my client. That's the best you could do, and everything else? Went to the container and everything I'm going to need was there. Talked to the workers there and was informed that I store our client's art piece there. They assured me that it would be even insured if anything happened. You only need to arrange the delay from your end." "Yeah, about that," started Tara, and Lawrence got the feeling that something had changed with their mission. "We got a deadline." "A deadline?" he repeated. "When?" "End of the year. It would be preferable to do it quicker, but that could also change into a date." "Fuck," he cursed. A date was the code word for taking out a target at a specific time. Most of the time, this condition was used to maximize the advantage of any follow-up objectives. For example, taking out a target before an important meeting so that the other participants didn't know about it or couldn't react fast and effectively to the changed circumstances. Yet while this could result in positive gains, it was difficult to pull off, and Lawrence disliked it immensely. A deadline was difficult enough as one had to plan for any eventualities within a time frame and had to adapt to changes in outside influence almost immediately. Furthermore, the better secured a target was, the longer the surveillance would take to find a moment to strike. A date ramped up the difficulty. Not only did one have to do the same things as for a deadline, but plan everything to conclude on a specific day, at a specific time, at a specific place. A lot of specific that could be derailed by the slightest changes one had no control over, especially outside influences that one didn't know about in the first place. And then one wouldn't even be able to delay as everyone else planned for it to happen. It seems like our client did make new plans that have to be taken into account. But it also looks like it will stay a deadline. Perhaps it will just be a preference to be a date. But if it isn't possible, it isn't possible. They just want the target out of the way, assuaged Tara with a calm voice. I haven't even started the surveillance of the target. Didn't even start to look for her, so I can't say anything about what is possible and what is not. Yet I think a deadline will definitely be possible. From what I know about our target, she will not be very inclined to keep herself hidden in a secure environment for too long. She doesn't know I'm hunting her, and she will not know until she's dead. Good to hear that you didn't lose your optimism. Yeah, replied Lawrence and lifted the glass to his mouth, only to notice that it was already empty. Frowning, he went over the bottle to fill the glass to fill it again, but stopped at the half mark as he didn't want to drink too much since he had to do some scouting on tomorrow and didn't want to do it with his head hurting from too much alcohol. He didn't know how hard this Asari spirit would affect him if he drank more than 2 glasses. I'll send you a notice if there are new developments, said Tara. I'll do the same with my status reports. All right, I want them every 3 days at the latest. Every 3 days? The mission has eyes on it from high up. I don't want to be unable to answer any questions if I'm asked. You think they're going to ask that often? I don't know, but I don't want to be caught with my pants down or with information that's older than 70 hours. Understandable, grunted Lawrence and sat down on the bed, finishing his glass and putting it on the night table closest to him. Sounds like you want the conversation to end, said Tara, and he heard a bit of a teasing note in her voice. You know I can talk with you forever. I can't get enough of your lovely voice, Lawrence replied, trying to tease back while trying to hold back the yawn threatening to escape. Sure, she said and stretched the word. Luckily for you, I can get enough of your voice, and my limit is already reached for today, so I'm going to let you sleep. Don't forget to send the reports. And without waiting for his reply, Tara closed the connection. Lawrence could only shake his head and quietly whisper, "That woman," to himself. He let himself fall backward onto the bed. His body relaxed almost involuntarily when he felt the softness of the mattress. Tomorrow's going to be a busy day too, he said to himself quietly, before closing his eyes and drifting off to sleep. 3 days later, Lawrence was slowly getting frustrated. He had scouted 4 different Eclipse bases and not seen even a hint of his target, despite their file on her saying otherwise. Ch.52. It seemed like Ayori was more cautious than expected and knew how to keep herself hidden. It could also be that Lawrence had been just unlucky and had scouted the wrong bases. In the end, the reasons didn't matter, only that he still had no idea where she was. How could he learn about her habits and routines to find the perfect moment to strike if he was unable to even locate her? He took a deep breath and told himself to calm down. Impatience and frustration wouldn't help him in the slightest. Only persistence and attention would be able to, and those would suffer if he let his negative feelings cloud his judgment. For now, he would continue to stick to the shadows and observe the different hideouts from afar and infiltrate them if he saw an opportunity. Yet, if he didn't find any lead in the next 4 days, he would proceed to the next phase of information gathering and grab one of the more important-looking Eclipse members for a nice chat. That approach would be more hands-on than he liked at the current progress of his mission, as the chances of them realizing that there was a new player would rise significantly. Making no progress at all was even more undesirable. He placed the last camera for this base in front of him. Should his target approach the base from any direction, the cameras he placed would send a notification to his Omni tool that their facial recognition software found a match. Until now, none of the cameras placed at one of the other 3 bases had sent him any notification. Perhaps he should start to trail different Eclipse members in the hope that they would lead him to bases Ad Astra didn't know about. Shaking his head, Lawrence discarded the idea. At least for now. He only had 2 more bases to visit and put up surveillance before he had to start looking for more. Finding one's target was methodical work and not something where one just hoped to get lucky by going off the script. Of course, he had found his targets by pure happenstance once or twice, but more often than not, he found them by working slowly and covering all possibilities. And this time would be no different. This mission was too important to simply leave it to luck. Besides, he didn't want to face Tara's anger when he made his next report. Checking his Omni tool if the data link was established and went through the right proxies took only a minute, and after he finished up, Lawrence started to move out of the area, careful to not be seen by anyone or anything. While Lawrence could do so with his eyes closed, at least in his own humble opinion, he did not take any chances. He never let his guard down or allowed himself a single second of inattention. Only when he decided that he was far enough from the Eclipse base did he let his guard down and take on the posture of a tourist looking around the city of Nos Astra for the first time. And while it was his first time visiting the city and the planet in general, he didn't think much about it. To Lawrence, it was just like any other city above a certain population figure. The same noises, the same kind of people, the same atmosphere. If he visited one of the bigger cities back on Earth, he would get the same experience. The only difference would be the paint job. As he walked through the crowds, his Omni tool suddenly started to notify him of a message. Pulling the message up, he saw that it came from one of the cameras he placed yesterday, and excitement started to swell up in his chest. Maybe he would get lucky after all, and Ayori showed up at one of the bases. His hopes were quickly dashed as his eyes scanned over the message, and he saw that it wasn't a match for her. Yet it wasn't without any success, as her face wasn't the only one the camera searched for. Instead of his target, one of her lieutenants, whom the AIS had previously identified, showed up. If he got there quickly enough, maybe he could follow the lieutenant back to another, more important base. Throwing his previous idea to stick to the plan away without a second of hesitation, he started to move more quickly toward the taxi stand. It would take him around 7 minutes to arrive in the vicinity, and another 5 to arrive at the base if he moved quickly. Thankfully, Lawrence had his camouflage equipment on his person, or else he wouldn't be able to move just as quickly and stay inconspicuous. And even if this proved to be a wild goose chase or the lieutenant was gone before Lawrence arrived there, taking this chance was better than not. If it led to nothing, he still could return to his original plan. Yet he didn't know if it was just a passing feeling, but he believed that would be the breakthrough he needed to get on with his mission.